Hi, today we will be discussing about impacts of climate change on biodiversity. Now that we know what and how important biodiversity is for the existence of human beings, biodiversity encompasses all the living beings, and its variations. It is very essential. Why? Because it provides us a lot of functions, a lot of services, and those services are called as ecosystem services like nutrient regulation, pollution prevention and what not, many more things. It provides a lot of services, but that biodiversity is a danger now due to many reasons, and one among that is climate change. So, in this presentation we will be looking at impacts of climate change on biodiversity. And we know the biodiversity traditionally is affected because of many reasons. One among that is habitat destruction, fragmentation and degradation. Second important point is over exploitation of species. Third is competition, predation and displacement of indigenous species by invasive species. And next important threat to biodiversity is disease outbreaks. Along with that, if you look at it deeply, very recently another threat has come up to the forefront, that is climate change. And this climate change is having a synergistic effect with other threats, other drivers of biodiversity, and because of this synergistic effect that the biodiversity may be at loss, may be lost, and the loss will be irreplaceable. It is very difficult to replace the biodiversity resources, biological resources. So, we need to understand that thing. So, before going to the climate change as such, we need to understand what it is. When you see the climate that we know very well that it is about the long term average weather of in a region, of over a region, that is climate. And when you talk about climate change, that is about the long term changes that is taking place in the climate. Perhaps it can be an average temperature or the precipitation also. That change in the trend, in the long term trend, that is climate change. And next is simultaneously variability is also important, and due to anthropogenic reason, due to human beings, there occurs the climate change also and variability also. This both human beings and climate change is causing a lot of problems to the biodiversity. And very importantly, if you look at it, the human beings and climate change has caused a lot of extinction problems. If you look at it, for example, the extinction of ice age giants like elephant sized sloth, saber-toothed cat that was extinct way back 12,000 years back. These animals were moving around in the southern South America Patagonian region. So, this elephant sized sloth, saber-toothed cat were extinct because of human action and climate change. And very recently a reef rodent, that is Australian great reef rodent, that was extinct, that was present in the Australian island region. It is it's called as Melomis rubicola. It is a small rat like animal that was extinct. Why? Because of ocean inundation. When I say ocean inundation, because of increase in temperature, the ocean the sea level rises, and because of the sea level rise, this particular reef rodent, which is present in a small cay, it is called a cay, Melomis cay. So, this particular, because of that onslaught of ocean water, what happened, frequent inundation has taken place in the island, and that led to the extinction of Melomis rubicola. It is a great barrier reef rodent. It is a very important thing that happened recently. And next important thing is the lizard diversity, and because of climate change, lizard diversity has reduced. And if you look at it from since 1975, 4% of local population of lizard that was extinct. And if you project by 2080, around 40% of local population of lizard that will be extinct. And as far as the species is concerned, by 2080 it is projected that 20% of lizard will be extinct. And next important threat, if you look at it, is very valuable, that is the pollinating insects and animals, that is having a prime role to play in the agriculture production. Those organisms, pollinating insects and animals, also are under threat because of climate change. And the business, if you look at it, because of this pollinating animals, insects, that is around 600 billion US dollars that is dependent on this pollinating insects and animals. If something happens to these beneficial organisms, what will happen? Our agriculture industry, think about agriculture industry. So the point here I wanted to stress is that the climate change intensely affects the biodiversity. And if you look at the symptoms, directly how this climate change has caused, what are the variations it has caused, and the prime thing if you look at it is, there occurs a change in the phenology of plants and animal behavior. When I say the phenology of plants and animal behavior, that will be changed because of climate change. The phenology, it means what? It is a timing of events in the life history of plant and animal behavior. For example, a flowering is it's a event, seasonal event. Flowering, breeding, these are all seasonal events, this is all phenology. The study of these events in plants and animals is called as phenology. And because of this climate change, there are a lot of changes, phenological changes, and the first and foremost thing is flowering in many plant species was advanced. That has occurred in the northern hemisphere. The flowering of many plants has been advanced, and that is the first symptom. Second important thing is the nesting and egg laying that has been advanced in tree swallows. It is a very important organism, and in that particular organism the nesting and egg laying, that event, that has been advanced because of climate change. And next important symptom as far as the phenology of the species are concerned, that is changes in the migration times. When I say changes in the migration times, many species, the timing of migration, that has changed because of change in the temperature, change in the precipitation pattern also, and some it has been reported that an hummingbird that is ceased to migrate. So that is how it is so much important. This climate change is very, very important. That has caused a lot of changes in the phenology. Next is the distribution. When I say species distribution, that is influenced by climate change. It's a very important thing that has been very well studied. One important author, he studied for the past 570 million years the fossil records that was available for past 570 million years, and he related that particular fossil record with the sea surface temperature record also. And when he correlated, he was definite that the temperature, the global temperature influences the biodiversity, influences the richness of the biodiversity. And when there is a warm period, definitely what happens, the biodiversity loss is taking place, and there is definitely a threat to all other organisms that leads to extinction of the species. Now we will see one by one with few examples. This Edith checker spot butterfly, it is a very popular and it is a beautiful butterfly that was found in the western part of America. This butterfly, its scientific name is Euphydrias editha. This particular butterfly, because of climate change, the distribution changed. It started found in the northern part, or in other words, it started moving towards the north, both latitudinally or altitudinally. Altitudinally also it went up. So that is a very, very important symptom that if you look at it as far as the species distribution is concerned. Second important example is sooty copper butterfly. This is another example that has been found in Europe. This butterfly, now it is found in Estonia. The distribution has spread towards the north. It is found in Estonia. It is in the northern part of Russia. It is there. It is a very Estonia, Latvia. These are all the countries near the Baltic Sea. This sooty copper butterfly is found in that region. And as far as the marine ecosystem is concerned, one important example, that is the eelgrass of Chesapeake Bay. This again, it is moving towards the northern side because of the increase in temperature. I mean to say the climate change. Next is the ecosystems. How the climate change is going to affect the ecosystem at the level of ecosystem. When you look at the level of ecosystem, the ecosystem structure, the components of the ecosystem, that all will be influenced by climate change. Very important example, that is Costa Rica. Costa Rica is in Central America, a very famous legendary cloud forest, that is Monteverde cloud forest. This Monteverde cloud forest, it is very unique. Why? Because it takes up the water from the condensation of the cloud. It's very unique one. So this Monteverdi cloud forest now started seeing dry runs. When I say dry, because of the forest, because of the cloud, you know what happened, because of the climate change, the cloud started seen in higher altitudes. Because of that reason, this Monteverdi cloud forest is not getting enough water, and that has caused a lot of harm, kind of dryness, dry season. So because of that reason, what happened, the system completely, the species present in the Monteverdi cloud forest, that is affected because of the stress. And next example, in the same forest, if you see one golden tod, it's a very beautiful frog, and that is perhaps that will be the first animal to be extincted that we will see in our generation itself, golden tod of Monteverdi. And next example, if you look at it, is very coolly, that is in the tropical oceans you will be finding a beautiful organism, that is coral reef. It shows the symbiotic relationship between the coral animal and the algae. It is very beautiful, and also for the color, and also as far as the ecological richness is concerned, it is productive, highly productive, and it is can be considered as the lungs of the ocean, and so much so that it makes the other organisms to survive, many organisms. So it means to say, I mean to say that the coral reefs are rich in biodiversity, and that coral reefs are endangered because of climate change. This climate change, if you look at it explicitly, it can be the increase in temperature, or it can be increase in the or variable in the variable nature of the precipitation, or many other factors. But if you look at it, the increase in temperature causes harm to the coral reefs, and the relationship between the coral animal and algae is affected, because a slight increase in temperature that is sufficient to break the relationship between the coral animal and algae, and because of that thing, the algae can be expelled, and because the algae is expelled, it will lead to bleaching, it will lead to the discoloration, and because of the discoloration, the coral will be finding discolored completely, and that will lead to further loss of productivity, further loss of biodiversity, and it is a very endangered species, and any slight increase in the sea surface temperature is sufficient to cause harm to the coral reefs. When you look at it at the nutshell, the biodiversity we are talking about is very essential for adapting to the climate change. When I say how important it is, because we need to understand that ecosystem, it has to be adapted because of the sudden increase in the temperature. Anthropogenically, if you look at it, the increase in temperature is very fast, and that is the reason why we will not be in a position to manage it properly. So we need to understand that thing, to take into account, and also the biodiversity can be incorporated or conserved for ecosystem management also, because this biodiversity, if you take care of it, definitely it will give an adaptation measure. It is an adaptation measure. When I say it is an adaptation measure, the resilience capacity of the ecosystem will be improved because of this biodiversity. That has to be managed, and this biodiversity, if you look at it, it is very difficult, because if something happens, if there is an increase in temperature, what happens, the organisms, it has to survive or else it has to adapt. These are the two compensatory mechanisms that is available if there is an increase in temperature, and the organisms can survive. If it is to survive, it will survive by migrating towards another region where the conditions are favorable, or if it is not in a position to migrate, it has to adapt itself. How? By having a behavioral plasticity or adaptational plasticity, it will adapt itself. That is a possible way, but if you look at it, if it is not in a position to survive also, if it is not in a position to adapt, in that case what happened, this species will be extinct, and that is an irreplaceable loss. We cannot afford for it. And if you look at it, the population, the biological population, if you look at it, is if it is dispersed, if the population is very dispersed, then the chance of survival is very less. So extinction will be much more than that. And if the population organisms are, if it is isolated, that also will create a lot of problem for the existence of the biological organisms. So we need to understand that thing and we need to take the measures, adaptation measures. We need to understand how best the biological resources can be conserved for the future generation. And next important point, as far as the impacts are concerned, the future impacts, it's very difficult to predict. Why? When I say why it is difficult to predict, because as I told you that the climate change is visibly can be studied by the increase in temperature, or the increase in the carbon dioxide content, or the ocean acidification. There are so many factors, but as far as the terrestrial ecosystem is concerned, two important factors that we have to take into account as far as climate change is concerned. One is the increase in temperature. The second important thing is the precipitation, the variability in the precipitation. These two will be affecting severely the terrestrial ecosystem. That can be explicitly explained by having an example of tropical rainforest. If there is an increase in temperature and there is a change in the precipitation pattern, that will affect the tropical rainforest ecosystem. And as far as the other ecosystem, that is marine ecosystem, is concerned, very carefully if you look at it, the prime factor that can drive that can cause harm to the biological resources, that is the increase in the sea surface temperature, and also one important thing, that is the pH. The pH is negative logarithm of hydrogen ion concentration, and that pH will change because of increase in temperature. Why? Because the increase in temperature, that is because of the increase in carbon dioxide concentration. The atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration is already crossed 400 ppm, and because of the increased carbon dioxide concentration, this carbon dioxide will be dissolved in the ocean, and that is called as ocean acidification, and that will change the pH of the ocean water. And because of the change in the pH or ocean acidification and also the sea surface temperature, that will cause harm to the living organism that is present in the marine ecosystem. And very explicitly, if you look at it, the coral reefs, that is most vulnerable as far as the marine ecosystem is concerned. And second important point, as far as the difficulties is concerned, see, the population, human population is increasing, and there is every chance of converting the landscape, whatever the landscape you are having, converting for the human use. There is less chance for the organisms to survive, less chance for the organisms to move from one place to another. It is a very, very difficult condition. So in future, as far as the movement of the migration of the species is concerned, it is very difficult. And as far as the climate change is concerned, I mentioned that the organism, either it has to adapt, and for survival it has to move to another place. Why? That particular place, the environment will be very suitable, there will be suitable favorable environmental conditions will be there, so the organisms can survive in that particular region. But think about it, if the organisms are unable to move, then it is very difficult. So it has to, definitely it will lead to extinction, or else a novel ecosystem will be possible. In that particular region, the organism which is unable to move or migrate to another region can survive, and it try to have its own strategies, adapt itself, and it will manage that how best it can survive in a new environment. So it will have its own adaptation measures. For example, if you look at it, even the flowering, I said that flowering, the flowering in the case of plants, that has been advanced. If you look deeply, can we call this as a strategy by the plants to evade this climate change? Yes, it is possible. It is a positive sign. The plants started showing adaptiveness. It started showing the adaptiveness. So when the flowering is advanced, it means that the plant shows the adaptiveness. It starts surviving in the changed environment. So that is a way, by way of which the plants or animals, it will show its own adaptive features, and that will be possible only when we have a rich biodiversity and the environmental condition also. So that main nutshell, what I want to say is that the ecosystem should be resilient. When I say ecosystem should be resilient, that will be possible only when the biodiversity, because the biodiversity what we are talking about, it is linked with many factors. It is a web of factors are involved. The web of factors, if that web of factors, it is so vulnerable, if something happens because of the climate change, that web will be collapsing. So that biodiversity, that biological resources that is present in the ecosystem, that should be conserved, and only when you conserve, the resilience power of the ecosystem or adaptive nature of the individual organisms and also the ecosystem, that will be definitely improved, and that will lead to the proper existence of the ecosystem and also for the human beings. And another important point as far as the difficulty is concerned, because the change is taking very fast as far as the climate change is concerned, it's very fast. In the last century, if you see the temperature increase in temperature, it was 0.74 degrees centigrade for the past century, but now in this century the change what we anticipate, it is around 3 to 6%. It's very huge, and under this sudden change in temperature, can we survive? Can these biological organisms can survive? It's a big question mark. So that is the reason why I stressed the importance of projecting ourselves. We need to develop a strategy, mitigation strategy also, mitigation and also the adaptation strategy. Both has to be simultaneously taken into account. The mitigation is a very essential thing. We cannot afford an increase in temperature. That is why world over we have come to a point that the temperature increase more than 2 degrees centigrade is very difficult thing. That is the reason why in the latest conference, Paris Convention, we have come to a conclusion that 2 degrees centigrade is a very difficult thing to manage, and we need to take measures to mitigation measures to reduce the increase in temperature or change in the climate, and simultaneously the adaptation. When you look at the adaptation at the level of organisms, we need to take into measures. For example, if you see an agriculture crops, when you see agriculture crops, the most important thing that is taking place in the agriculture scenario is that the increase in temperature, increase in carbon dioxide is going to affect severely the agriculture production. And it has been noted very clearly, categorically, that agriculture production is severely to be constricted, to be reduced because of climate change. One factor I can say very well that the increase in temperature is going to cause harm to the agriculture production, and the second factor as far as the climate change is concerned, that is increase in carbon dioxide concentration. But when you see the increase in carbon dioxide concentration, it has to an extent a beneficial effect on a group of plants called C3 plants. But as far as the C4 plants are concerned, it is not having that effect. But in case of C3 plants, because of when it is a photosynthetic mechanism, because of increase in carbon dioxide concentration, what happens? The rubisco enzyme, that is called a rubisco means rubulose carboxylase oxygenase enzyme. This enzyme can capture more of carbon dioxide, and that will increase the yield of the agriculture crops, that is particularly in C3 plants. But in nutshell, in net effect, if you look at it, is the agriculture production that will be affected. And now agriculture is it's a very important thing. Agro ecosystem or agro-biodiversity is very important resource, and that agro-biodiversity will be affected because of climate change. And what we need to do is we need to go back to the resources, that is agro-biodiversity, and those resources, from that resources we need to get the materials, superior genes, quality genes, that we have to take it and we have to incorporate in the plant breeding work, and we need to develop a new crop that is climate resilient. Climate resilient crop has to be developed, then only this climate change can be managed, and that is a very important thing. And when you talk about the resilient crop, and this resilient crop development is not an easy thing, we need to look for these biological resources, agro-biodiversity. That is the reason why I said this agro-biodiversity, or for that matter biodiversity, has to be taken into account for policy decisions, has to be taken into account for conservation, and it is a very important thing for managing the future. And as far as the agro-biodiversity is concerned, I have mentioned that this agro-biodiversity is going to be playing a very vital role in managing the climate change. And also I said that the climate change is not only increase in temperature, it is not only increase in the carbon dioxide concentration, it also includes the water, the precipitation. There is a variability along with the climate change. There is a variability also, there will be variability in precipitation that also cause harm to the agriculture production, because the frequency of flood, frequency of drought, that will increase, and because of this reason definitely the agriculture production will be hampered, will be affected. And we need to understand, to manage this particular condition, we need to look for the genes that will confer drought resistance, and those resistance we need to understand, we need to take into account, and we have to breed those kind of crops, drought resistant crops. And second important thing as far as this drought resistance is concerned, we need to look for the crops which consume less of water. So crops like sorghum, crops like maize, these crops can be grown instead of high water consuming crops. So in that way we can reduce the requirement of water. So, water is a very, very important resource, because as far as agriculture is concerned, more than 80% of irrigation water is definitely, because water is used more for agriculture purpose to the extent of 80%. So, water is going to be a constraint. So, in the era of climate change, we need to look for drought resistant crops, and also when you look at it another angle, that is flood. Flood is also a very important thing, and all the factors put together, if you look at it, the stress because of the biotic stress I am talking about, that will lead to abiotic stresses. That abiotic stresses, that is both has to be managed together under the umbrella of the climate resilience, whatever the agriculture practice we are looking at it. But one more thing, along with the agriculture crops, if you look at it, is the biotic stresses. The biotic stresses in the form of pest, disease causing organisms, microorganisms, that is also going to rise, and because of this stress the agriculture production will be affected. The pest population, there will be dynamic change in the pest population. When there is a dynamic change in the pest population, our agriculture crops, if you look at it, it will be, they are highly vulnerable, they cannot manage it. So, what happened because of the change in the pest dynamics or pest resurgence, what happens, these vulnerable crops that will be severely affected because of the biotic pressure. And also as far as the organisms, I am talking about the pathogens, that is also equally important in the changing climate, because these avirulent microorganisms, avirulent organisms can become virulent when the environmental conditions are favorable for the pathogen, that will become virulent, and the virulent microorganisms can cause a lot of harm to the agriculture crops. And in a nutshell, what I want to say is that these all the stresses, biotic and abiotic stresses, causes a lot of harm to the agriculture production. And in the age of increasing human population and declining genetic resources, or in other words genetic erosion, we need to focus completely on a strategy, and that strategy should incorporate or very well use the biological resources. We need to conserve it, collect it, conserve it, explore it. So, everything has to be combinedly taken care of, and then only then we can manage this climate change. So, it is a very, very tricky condition. We are at the crossroads. Why? Because this climate change is affecting biodiversity, and at the same time we need to manage, managing the climate change, we need to take into account the biodiversity. We need to take into account biodiversity for enhancing the resilience of ecosystem. Thank you.